Hello, and welcome to the Courageous Minds Counseling YouTube channel. This is your girl, Jakari Owens, owner and therapist at Courageous Minds Counseling. Today, the topic is trauma, and not only trauma, but relational trauma. I think that is something that a lot of people have questions about. What is relational trauma? I know what trauma is, but what is that relational trauma and how can you help? Because that is something that we help with here at Courageous Minds Counseling. So let's jump into that. But first, let's talk about what trauma is. Trauma is one of those words that can scare a lot of people because it just sounds scary. It sounds like something horrible happened to you. And it is in most cases. But I want to give you a more simpler term of trauma because I feel like a lot of people dismiss a lot of things that were traumatic to them, or they push them under, or they feel like it was the norm and so it can't be trauma because it's what I'm just used to, right? So trauma in its most simplest form is something stressful that happened to you that you were left to deal with on your own. Let me say that again. Something stressful that happened to you that you were left to deal with on your own. And I use the word stressful because it can be something that is perceived to be super small, but for whatever reason, I'm unable to understand it, to process it, to cope with it, and ultimately move through it, which then started to affect my day-to-day functioning. And when things touch on that same trigger, I have this huge response to those. So it doesn't have to be what everyone perceives that to be. Another thing about trauma is it is your perception. It has nothing to do what other people think is traumatic or that how they view trauma. It has everything to do with how you have experienced it and have you either coped or not been able to cope with that thing that happened to you. Now let's talk about relational trauma. Relational trauma is the trauma of close relationships in its simplest form. When we're talking about attachment is the bond or the connection between a caregiver and a child. But what happens is if there is an abruption of separation, if there's neglect, abuse, if there's parents that are emotionally unavailable, there is a disconnect in that emotional connection and ultimately can be traumatizing and can last over a lifespan. It can affect how you view yourself, it can affect how you view relationships and how you actually interact within relationships. And so relational trauma is actually very, very huge. It's one of the first things you can experience in this world is how connected you feel with a caregiver. And that will affect how close you can feel with other people, how much you trust other people and yourself, and your ability to communicate and move through relationships within your lifespan. So attachment trauma is crucial, and we'll talk more about manifestations of or symptoms of attachment trauma and how that shows up in people's lives and the impact that it has on a later video. So if you are interested in learning more about attachment or relational trauma, please feel free to like and subscribe, and we will jump into that. Until next time, again, I'm your girl, Jakari Owens, owner and therapist at Courageous Minds Counseling. See you in the next video.